I think you'll see tonight what they've been able to put together for this Zoom meeting. I was interested, the first chat in the chat box was you can Zoom with Zoom when Jay was talking about how to zoom in. So let's move ahead. So tonight we're going to talk about the project background, then we're going to talk about the alternatives that we've been developing, and most importantly, we're going to be looking for your feedback. One of the things that, well, let me just go ahead with the background, and I'll add one comment near the end. So this project is part of a much larger project that we're trying to get done piece by piece. Years ago, and I mean quite a few years ago, back in the late 80s, there was a big effort to create a beltway all the way around Denver, and E470 was part of that, but there was another part on this side of town, W470, and it would have brought a 6-lane, 70-mile-an-hour freeway right through the corridor, which Golden did not find very acceptable for a lot of reasons. And one of the reasons is pretty obvious, noise, but the other reason is perhaps less obvious, is these roads become barriers, big barriers, and can cut off chunks of the community if you're not careful. So Golden opposed that. There was actually an election to see if the highway, that they were going to put a $10 fee on your license plates to seed the money to design the highway, and the highway would be paid for by tolls. That lost overwhelmingly within the corridor region. It went down like 5-1. So at that point, we were thinking their freeway is not coming to Golden, but well, it would not die. It was resurrected through efforts by the counties, CDOT, even the Denver area. And time and again, they would do a study, they would do planning, and they would get to a plan that just couldn't be implemented. So it came, it went, it came, and in the late 1990s and early 2000s, they were working on a plan they had put together and had a consultant, and were again designing everything. So Golden again was opposing this vigorously, and as part of that effort, we worked with our consultants. We did our own modeling, and we came up with a program called the Golden Plan, and that plan was first adopted by City Council in 2003, and it was a plan that we said Golden could live with. It was designed to minimize the impacts, and it was slower speeds we have out there today, but it had specific elements to it that we wanted to use to take the barrier problems with these kind of roads out. And the first project on that plan that we've completed was the US6.
Due to large-scale outages in your area, we do not have an estimated restoration time, right?
The first element of this that was completed is the interchange at US6 and 19th. And if you've been there, we did an awful lot of work to try to connect the neighborhood to the community. And we will be doing the same thing on this program. But tonight, we are perhaps more concerned with the traffic patterns that you like and you would prefer, and we want that input. And don't think too much about the alternatives. Boy, we just jumped way ahead. Don't think too much about the alternatives because once we get the traffic pattern that you prefer, we will then go to work on making it as friendly as humanly possible for pedestrians and bicycles. And we will work on that, and you will see that during our future presentation. So this particular project goes from all the way down at Kenny Run, and at that reason is CDOT is planning a wildlife crossing there, and we need to make sure that we are tied in properly to that. So we start there, and then we go all the way back up to where the 470 ramps come down to make sure that we have tied everything together properly. Then we have to tie back into Jefferson County, but we also will be working up Heritage Road as far as Warner Drive, because we have grading and other things to make sure we tie together. So that's the project limits, and that's the background and how we got to here. I guess one thing I should say, as we continue to fight around building the Golden Plan instead of some big freeway, we actually negotiated items within the Golden Plan with CDOT in 2013. We signed a memorandum of understanding with CDOT. So this is one element of that. CDOT has agreed, CDOT being the Colorado Department of Transportation, agreed to this as the plan for the corridor, and that agreement has withstood time, and 19th Street was the first of that was developed. This particular project is funded for design. It is not currently funded for construction, but as we continue through design and we get good cost estimates on where we're going, we know that it is a high priority for CDOT, and hopefully we will be able to attain funding, if not during design, shortly thereafter. But with that, I'm going to turn it over to Ann Byerly, and she can tell you we learned a lot of information at the last open house, and Ann's going to go through it.
Good evening, everyone. It's so nice to have you guys here. We just, I think, hit 100 people participating. That's fantastic, given the power outage we're aware of in Heritage Dells. I'm Ann Byerly. I work for Dan in Public Works, and I wanted to summarize the data that we collected in July, and we collected a lot of it. So I'm going to try and hit the common themes and the high points and not get too much into the weeds, because I have a lot of information and a lot of slides. If I get going too fast, or if there's something that you wish I would slow down and talk more about, either jump in or mention something in the chat, and we can talk about it a little more. Next slide. So the last meeting, we had a lot of it. We had great attendance. More than half the people, way more than half the people, were Golden residents, and most of them had lived in Golden between 6 and 20 years. And they represented neighborhoods across the entire city, from Mesa Meadows to the north to Heritage Dells, Beverly Heights. It was a great overview of folks in town. Next slide. We asked about how often people use the interchange, and when you get right down to it, a lot of the people drove it every day. 80% of people drove it at least once a week. Actually, I should say used it. because while the vast majority were drivers, 81% jumps to 85% if it's either people driving or riding in a car through the intersection. We did have 14% that were cyclists that used the interchange that way, and even a handful of people who were runners going through the interchange. The brave souls. We wanted to talk more about what the issues and challenges were around the interchange. And on this slide, you can see that it's about traffic. The traffic backs up, it's heavy during rush hour, and it doesn't feel safe. On the next slide, it gets more into the multimodal issues around the interchange. It's unsafe and unfriendly to bicycles and pedestrians. It lacks multimodal connectivity to area destinations. We even got a comment that we needed to find a way to protect animals, and clearly we have the wildlife crossing and wildlife that sneaks around the fence at Heritage as well. But once we got through that, we started kind of talking about what are the outcomes that we want to see. And as we go through this part of this conversation, if you hear something or see something in this portion that resonates with you, or maybe it's familiar because it came from you in July, keep that in mind as we start talking about the alternatives, because these are the things that we're looking for, and the ways that we measure what will be the success of the alternatives that we select. When we started talking about success, it was some obvious things: safer traffic flow, better safety, better ease of use for bikes and peds, reducing congestion, addressing the barrier aspect of the highway. Next slide. And then as we kind of narrowed it down to priorities, it became pretty clear. Make the intersection work better for cars first, then make the intersection work better for bikes, and then make the intersection work better for pedestrians, and even make the intersection work better for wildlife crossing, all while making it more attractive. The next thing we did at our last meeting is we pulled out the 9 community values that were identified during the Golden Vision 2030 process. And we started talking about how a successful design of this interchange could meet the values of the community. So the first one, we value being a community that is walkable, bikeable, and accessible to all, has exactly those themes. We could make this bike and pedestrian facilities high comfort. We can reduce the speeds of cars and discourage through traffic on Heritage. This was actually kind of the first place we started hearing about slowing cars down. We hadn't gotten that in the earlier conversations, but this is make it better for bikes and peds and slow the cars down. Next, please. Our next value is being an active, healthy community that appreciates the outdoors and is connected to the natural environment. In this, we heard comments about green spaces and tree canopy, coexisting with the wildlife corridors, dealing with noise, making sure we kept the views of the mountains and added color to the project. All good ideas. The third value, we value safe, quiet, clean, well-maintained neighborhoods. In here, we saw more about noise. We had a comment to make it a park with a highway underneath it, following 19th Street. We got comments to make sure things were easily maintained, that the flow of traffic minimized pollution, and that everything we did was clean and simple. Next value, we value supporting our local businesses and keeping a vibrant downtown for future generations. We heard that getting a shuttle between the Jeffco station and downtown would be nice. But we also heard that it would be nice that we need to make sure that it's easy and convenient to get to the Heritage businesses, not just the downtown businesses. Make it easier for cars and residents living off of Heritage to get downtown, and certainly to focus on connectivity. And it was nice to see that we also got acknowledgement about this is a gateway to the Jeffco government offices, and making sure that that's taken care of. Value E, we value retaining convenience to services and amenities in our proximity to Denver and the mountains. This was a spot where we started talking about Warner, which we've actually talked about internally within the design team, but maybe there need to be improvements at the intersection at Warner Drive, and recognizing that Heritage is a key connection to light rail and trail connections, places like Apex Open Space and the businesses off Heritage. We heard some specifics about how difficult it is to get to northbound US6, 6 trail off of Heritage, which is a common path for cyclists. Lots of comments about access and better signage. We value our appreciation of history and the arts and support for quality education. We have a suggestion to add some art, like we did on 19th Street, add some interpretive panels for the nearby lime kiln and Trip Branch, and to make the hardscape and other civil elements artistic. So that's a challenge for Paul and as we move forward. Finally, we value, well, not finally, we have a few more. We value being a family-friendly, kid-friendly, and kid-supportive community. And as we started talking about this was the first time we started hearing about the desire to get kids to and from Splash, get them to and from the golf course, get them to and from Bell Middle School, from the neighborhoods. We heard about the desire for a water fountain, dog fountain, but really making bike connectivity comfortable for the kids was a big one hit here, as well as acknowledging the agency of the Bell Middle School and high school students of the possibility that they might have some opinions themselves we should pursue. Value theme H, we value maintaining friendliness and connections with neighbors and other residents. There was comments here about walkways, full separation of vehicles from pedestrians and cyclists, pedestrian level lighting, and connections, making sure we were connections. The final value, we value keeping enhancing our sense of community pride, our diversity and tolerance of others, and our community character and community events. Golden values a community supported by a diversity of people, generations, activities, public spaces, and amenities. Here we heard about public art, respect of different needs and values, and making it welcoming and intuitive, among other comments. And finally, we got some general comments that were nice to hear. We got some really positive feedback on the Zoom format from our July meeting, and I'm really curious to see now that the novelty of Zoom is long gone, whether we'll get similar feedback today as we move forward. But I want to really stress that the input that we've collected so far and what we collect tonight is driving the design team. Tonight, as we talk about alternatives, we're going to have a heavy vehicle traffic focus. But I want to assure you that all of these other elements remain part of the conversation and are being used as we move forward in design. And speaking of collecting more data, I'm going to turn you over to Jay Renkins, who's going to get us started with some more questions.
Great. Thanks, Anne. And Kyra, if you don't mind, maybe giving us the overview of the first couple slides, and then I can cover the questions.
Yeah, definitely. Thanks, Jay. I'm just going to give everyone a brief introduction about this interactive survey platform that we'll be using. I know Jay introduced it briefly at the beginning, but I think we had several folks come in a little late. Those of you that attended the first open house are familiar with this. This is Mentimeter. It's an interactive survey platform. You will access the survey on your own personal device, and we do recommend that you use a separate device that you're using from for the Zoom call. So it might be difficult if you have the Zoom call on the same screen as the Mentimeter survey, because if one tab's open, you might not be able to see what the presentation is. We will be switching back and forth a couple of times between the Zoom presentation and the survey content, and we don't want you to miss any slides from the presentation. If you don't have another device and you're only on one, it's still doable. Just know you'll need to toggle back and forth between the Mentimeter survey and the Zoom call. So I'm going to put up some information for how to access this survey. If you go to menti.com, that's menti.com, and enter the 7-digit code that you see on your screen, that'll allow you to access the survey. If you're using a smartphone, you can also hold your camera up to this QR code and it'll scan it, and it should bring up the URL for you, and you can access the website directly. So we can give you all just a minute to gain access to the survey. And if you have any questions or concerns, issues, feel free to put them in the chat and we will address them.
Great. And I also put the, I guess we're inundating you with the information, but put the web address and the code in the chat as well, if that's helpful. Frank and I think Lisa asked earlier about getting information from tonight's meeting. We do understand that some folks have a power outage. Other people may have a conflict for other reasons. So we'll be putting the presentation, a PDF, a recording of this meeting, as well as some of the exhibits and a representation of some of our questions and other input methods on Guiding Golden. And those will be posted by Friday. So thank you for that question. All right, Kyra, if you want to go to the first question, and rest assured the information is still in the chat. It also lives up on the top of all of our polling questions screens here. So next slide. All right, so we're going to start off with a little bit of a warm up. It's going to give us a better idea of who's participating this evening. And also help us compare, across our different meetings. So this is the same set of questions we asked at that first meeting that Anne was highlighting for you all. It looks like we're getting a great level of response already. We're up to 46, 48, 49. And it looks like so far, the majority of folks have been in Golden for 11 years or more, 18 or so with 11 to 20 years. 17 longer than 20 years. We also have 10, 6 to 10 years. Let's see. For those outside of Golden proper, we have 4 people indicated they do not live in Golden but live in Jefferson County. And then just a handful of people, 3 folks live outside Jefferson County. And we do understand that this interchange serves a regional purpose as well along the corridor. So we definitely invite that, that input from folks who live outside of Golden and out of the county as well. So thank you for participating. We just want to make sure that we're understanding who is providing input through the process. So we're at 67. Let's give it another maybe 20 seconds if anyone wants to get on the platform, hasn't yet. Again, that's www.menti.com, M-E-N-T-I. It's up on the top of the screen there in the chat. And then the code is 3628328. All right, so we're at 69 currently. We'll give it another couple of seconds, and then we'll move to our next slide. We just have about 5 questions in this section, and we'll go a little quicker as we go through these. All right, so we have 70 responses. That's what we'll look for on our questions. 71 now. All right, if you can advance, thank you. All right, so if you do live in Golden, what neighborhood do you live in? And for this question, I believe we're asking you to type that in on your screen, so it'll pop up. This is what is affectionately known as a word cloud. So those names of neighborhoods that are entered most often are going to appear larger on the screen. So we have the most representation so far from Stonebridge, Heritage Dells, which maybe the power is returned at least to a portion of that neighborhood. So that's great news. Thanks for joining us, everybody. Eagle Ridge, Lookout Mountain, Beverly Heights, but a really great representation across the entire community. This is awesome. So we have 63 respondents. We'll give it another maybe 10, 15 seconds for people to enter. We had, I think, up to 72 on the last question. And I do understand some people don't live in Golden, so we're not going to get the same number. All right. Kyra, if you won't mind advancing. How often do you pass through the US6 and Heritage Road Interchange?
I did.
Great.
But you saw it wasn't going through. I mean, what do you want me to say? I'll try one more time.
Reboot.
It's not the machine, it's Zoom.
Okay.
There we go. I got them muted. If you are having troubles with Zoom or the platform or Menti, please try to use the chat and we'll respond to you. But it's looking like most folks are using this at least several times a week. So far that would be about, what, 59 folks are several times a week or daily. We have 4 people with approximately once a week and 1 to 3 times a month at 6. That's 71 respondents. So if you want to go to the next one, Kyra. And how do you move through the corridor? And this is getting at the what mode of transportation you're using. As Ann said in our first meeting, I think it was about 81%. It indicated driving a car, 4% riding in a car, but we did have some joggers, walkers, bikers. It's looking like we're getting a similar response this evening. Great. So 65 people so far, up to 68. Awesome. And that is our last question in this section. If you can keep that open on your phone, in your other browser, on your tablet, it'd be helpful because we're going to, as each alternative is presented, we're going to then ask a set of just a handful of questions after each one. So we'll be going back and forth to the Menti after Nancy gives us an overview of each alternative. So Nancy, take it away.
Thanks, Jay. Next slide, Kyra. So just to give everyone kind of an update and an idea visually of where we are in the process. As we had the open house number 1 back in July with issues identification. And since that time, we've been doing some of our field work, developing alternatives, having some additional conversations with Golden and CDOT in Jefferson County. And so what we're presenting tonight are preliminary alternatives. And then once we kind of go further into the design of the alternatives and the evaluation, we'll finish with a preferred alternative. And that's when we'll have open house number 3. And as several people have mentioned, tonight we're looking more for input on traffic patterns and how we can handle the traffic at this intersection. Open house number 3 is going to give you a lot more opportunity to talk about whether it's amenities, what the pedestrian and bicycle connections look like, what are the aesthetic treatments. Paul's going to talk about some of them a little later today, but mostly that's when we're going to get into the details of that. We need to continue moving through the alternatives evaluation process before we get too into the weeds with some of these aspects. And we'll also be presenting that to you for additional feedback as we do refinement and preliminary design, and then we will go to final design of the project. So also too, for everyone, just please feel free to ask some questions in the chat, and I'll try to answer them along the way. So the first alternative we have is a signalized diamond. This is pretty standard for everyone. You should understand how this operates. Just for everyone's reference, because Golden does not always do cardinal directions well, we are referring to US6 as running east and west, and Heritage and Jefferson County Parkway is running north and south. And so what we're showing you are some graphical representations and perspectives for each of these alternatives. In all these alternatives, we're going to be lowering US6 like we did down at 19th Street and having Heritage and Jefferson County Parkway cross over US6 on a bridge. So with this one, we have signals controlling the ramps and the Heritage traffic. And then as in all options, as you can kind of see in the orange, maybe a Kyra, you can put your cursor over the regional trail. We have that staying on the outsides of the ramps and then having some sort of grade separation at Jefferson County Parkway. We haven't determined exactly what that looks like. We're also showing for now all of the pedestrian and bike connections at grade. Once again, we'll be looking at some treatments when we get more into the alternatives evaluation as to what we can do for those particular connections. So next slide, please. We didn't actually draw up a perspective on this one. This is a similar signalized interchange. I think most people are pretty familiar with it. So this is the side road over the highway. As you can see, the cars are controlled by the signals. You have the left turns, having to wait, also at the ramp, having to get onto the side road with the signals. I'm not going to go into too much detail. I think most people actually know how a signalized interchange works. This one too is for some pros and cons. Obviously, it's very familiar to drivers. It has one of the smallest footprint when we're talking about from the actual bridge over US6, which is a consideration we're taking into account just from a budget standpoint, because we don't have construction funding yet, and we are looking to try to identify sources for that. It also gives us the possibility in the future of looking at some continuous on-street bike lanes along Heritage and Jefferson County. A con, not everywhere, but in Golden, a con is we would have to use traffic signals. We've also done some initial traffic analysis, and this option would have the longest vehicle delays and queues would be basically the backups, the lines at the signals. It does not slow vehicle speed. So as Ann mentioned at our July 7th or our July open house, that was one of the things that we heard from you, is that you really wanted to slow down the speeds on Heritage. And then this is a little bit more technical, but generally you like to have a certain distance between signals in order to get them to operate efficiently. Due to the constraints we have at this location, it'd be really hard to get that proper spacing between the signals. And then the last thing is, even though we're not concentrating on these ped and bike connections, this option, since you're crossing at the signals, is you would be crossing multiple lanes of traffic at one point in time. So I think with that, we will go to, I believe we have some Mentimeter questions, correct, Kyra?
That's right, Nancy. So first, and we did hear in the chat, someone said a pedestrian bridge, not the big dig. Someone else said unclear how bikes are being prioritized with a signalized diamond. Conflicts with turning cars will persist, or conflicts, excuse me. And then west on 6th and south on Heritage will overwhelm the intersection as it does now. So maybe as folks are weighing in on this first question, how do you feel this first alternative would work for motorized vehicles? Nancy, if you wouldn't mind responding to that bike and ped, how we're addressing it tonight and how we will moving forward.
You bring up a good point. Signals are not the best for bikes because it does not actually address the conflict points. We would look at what we could do with, I think a ped bridge was mentioned. We would look at what we could do for some grade separation aspects. We're just not that far enough along in the process. We would like to make sure that we are providing safe passage for those wanting to use an alternative mode of travel. And then when you say west on 6 and then south on Heritage, as I'm looking at it, we would be taking the US6 traffic out of the quote unquote queue for the signal, but that still would be an issue even at the signal. There are just some things that we can do by taking that US6 through traffic out of the way, that we could play around with the signals and make it work better than the current signal does. But that still could be a potential option with, like I said earlier, with delays and queues just on the ramps at the signals.
Great.
I'm seeing something too from Jen. We will be reviewing the safety of the bikers and the walkers with each scenario and option as we go more into alternatives evaluation. We do know that that is important. We're just right now today starting with getting your input on the traffic.
Great, thank you, Nancy. So on this first question, it looks like we got all the responses in based on our response rate earlier. So it looks like some people saying they don't like this option for motor vehicles, about a third of folks who responded actually. 7 people said I like it and think it will function well for motorized vehicles. I think some people are noting in the chat that this is a relatively typical approach to an interchange that you see along a lot of highways. 19 folks said I like it, but I have 1 or 2 concerns. And then 17 said I have several significant questions or concerns. And then 9 people are not sure or neutral. So we will be looking at some other options as they're being suggested in the chat, but let's move to the next question. In 1 or 2 words, what is the most notable weakness of this more typical signalized diamond interchange treatment? Luke said in the chat, diverging diamond would work much better if traffic signals were to be used, in my opinion. Luke, I don't know if you got a preview of the presentation, but that is one of the alternatives we'll be looking at and discussing. Sandra is worried about getting out and in during the construction. That's a good one, Nancy. Maybe while we're watching some of these responses pop up, if you want to speak to sort of the timeline for this process, full design and construction.
I think we'd be looking at trying to do a similar construction time frame like we did at 19th. Obviously, it would depend on which of these alternatives come back as the preferred alternative. We would want to make sure that we are handling traffic so we make it as painless as possible. Construction is never painless, but we would probably look at doing something similar to what we did at 19th, where we either look to put some traffic on, build the ramps first in some aspect and put some traffic on the ramps. We have a little less space here to do what, and it's not a technical term, what I affectionately like to call the whoop-de-doodle at 19th, where 19th kind of went around in a low speed condition with multiple curves. But we would look to try to make it as painless as possible and make sure it's as safe as possible, because we know that people still need to get across 6 during construction, and doing everything that we can to separate the construction traffic from the public, because that is the best way to encourage safety during construction, while also looking at some ideas. And this is going to come up in some alternatives coming up, looking at some ideas for phasing that would speed the construction up.
Perfect. Thank you, Nancy. So highlighting just a couple of these, then we'll move on to the next question. But signals identified as a weakness, bicycle safety, I'm assuming the lack thereof, too fast, traffic signals, again, traffic lights, people saying that in a lot of different ways. Some encouragement to separate bikes and peds. People are saying that it's ugly, that you have to stop, close signals, delays. These are great. And we'll be sharing these results also with folks on Guiding Golden. So you'll get a chance to look at these in more detail. If you could advance to the next one, Kyra. And this is our last question, I believe, for this alternative. But we wanted to see in 1 to 3 words, similarly, trying to get you to focus on positives as well as the negatives. What would be the most notable strength for alternative number 1? So cheap, familiar. While some of those comments are coming in, I'll visit the chat really quickly. So Luke assured everyone that he did not see the presentation ahead of time. Good answer. Jeremy said he also wanted to keep in mind discouraging semi-trailer traffic heading south from here along Heritage. Great point. Lisa said, as someone who lives right near the new 19th Street lid, the design works great, no delays, waiting for the lights, safe to walk and bike through. Awesome. 19th Street construction traffic was great, did not slow Richard down. And then Brian agrees that 19th is generally great, but Highway 6 bike path would have been much better with a full tunnel rather than 3 crossings, not family friendly. That's really good feedback, Brian, thank you. So a couple of notable strengths here. It's cheap, maybe compared to some of the other options. It's familiar, simple, easy. So that's something we want to think about. Can we achieve, maybe not cheap, but, something that is affordable in the build out, something that feels simple and familiar, that's intuitive. Luckily, we have, a different type of interchange already in Golden as people are pointing out at 6th and 19th. What else? Efficient traffic flow, drops speeding traffic below Heritage. Plain Jane. All right, I think, again, we'll share these afterwards, but I think we're getting a good sense here. So we'll go back to the next alternative.
Okay, thanks, Jay. Luke, this is just for you. This is our Diverging Diamond option. However, it is stop controlled. So I don't know how many of you are familiar. There is a Diverging Diamond up at McCaslin in US 36 in Superior. However, this one would be controlled by stop signs, not by signals. So Heritage Road would cross over, and then all the remaining movements would be free flow movements with minimal conflicts. Vehicles going fully through the interchange would only stop once with minimal conflicts. Once again, showing the regional path on the outside of the ramps and some sort of grade separation for the through traffic. And then you could see our initial thought of just the at-grade trail connections or sidewalk connections. Let's go to the next slide, Kyra, because we're kind of doing a bird's eye perspective, which will help them. So this is how it looks. And Kyra, continue please to do your great cursor work. So if you're coming from, say, Golden Ridge to the south and you go to the stop sign, if you're following me, then you'll cross over at this location where there's a gap. You'll only have to worry about one lane of traffic from the opposite direction. And then you'll have your choice in your lane of either going through to say the Jefferson County complex without stopping, or you can turn left to go on to US6 and Clear Creek Canyon or Boulder or anything to that effect. Same thing when you're coming off the ramps. You'll basically either take a left or a right. You'll be turning into a lane, only having to account for one other direction or one other lane of traffic in the same direction, more of a yield condition and a gap. And so it's a little different. I don't know if one has been done with a stop control, but it does help too in this configuration. A lot of you have mentioned 19th Street. I'm glad that you feel it operates well. One thing that's a little different about 6 and Heritage is we have much more balanced traffic, and a lot of it is really concentrated around the right and left turns. So this helps reduce those conflicts and those cues that a lot of you were bringing up on the signalized option. So it also minimizes the crossing conflicts. So let's go through kind of the pros. It is similar to US6 and 19th operation. I mean, it's not the same, obviously, but at least when you're looking at those free flow movements and trying to control everything with stop signs, it's unsignalized. It reduces the vehicle crossing conflicts. This one has some construction phasing benefits. There are ways that we could build portions of the bridge to keep heritage traffic going, and maybe opportunities to reduce that construction time frame. This also gives us the opportunity in the future to look at continuous on-street bike lanes. The cons, diverging diamonds are still unfamiliar to drivers. Once you enter them, they make sense, but it does look strange from a bird's eye perspective. One thing is oversized vehicles cannot go through at ramps, which is sometimes helpful if you have an emergency management issue. I know for most of you, you maybe don't care about difficulty to plow in winter, but this is something that we have to consider with both Golden and CDOT and the ability to do U-turns. And then if we're looking at grade crossings, this has the highest number of crossings for potential trails, although we are still looking at the regional trail being grade separated. So let's see if I've got any comments. And maybe we can go to Mentimeter while I look at the chat, Jay, and try to answer questions.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, got a couple of yays for the one on McCaslin. Are yield signs actually more safe? Richard, in the case where you're yielding to the same direction of traffic, they're generally, I mean, I don't have the studies to back up, but generally viewed as safe as stop signs. Okay, I am not, Jacob, I'm not as familiar. I do know that there's a Diverging Diamond down at I-25 in Fillmore. I haven't driven through that one yet. I would guess that we don't have near the amount of traffic. We have taken some initial look at traffic analysis, and just for everyone's information, much like we did at 6 and 19th, we'll be doing some modeling to make sure that things work correctly and that we are providing the appropriate lanes. Can fire trucks make it through? That is an excellent question, and that's something that we'll definitely have to talk to Golden Fire Department about. It might be doing some things about There are some aspects that we did at 19th, or you've seen at other places with roundabouts, where maybe you have raised aprons or the islands allow fire trucks to go over them, but not maybe regular cars. Definitely something for us to consider. When we say what type of oversized vehicles can't make it through the intersection, we would be designing more for like RVs and smaller vehicles, but probably not for big interstate semi trucks. Hopefully that answered your question, Grace. And how this handles growth in traffic. We are, not to go too into the weeds, but when we look at traffic and we're analyzing it and modeling it, we're looking at the 2045 horizon. So that would be year 2045, where we're looking at what the regional Denver metro area is and what other land uses could increase in this area.
Nancy, if I can interrupt for just 1 second.
Go ahead.
So on this question,
Sorry, Jay, I went over.
no, you're fantastic. Well, I'll have you keep doing that on the next slide, but I just wanted to give people a little recap of this one first. So we're having a little overlap in the kind of the answers there, but I don't like this option for motor vehicles, is the kind of the blue-green color with 2. I have several significant questions and concerns with 8, not sure, neutral 11. I like it, but I have 1 or 2 concerns, 32 folks. So definitely something, it sounds like worth exploring further moving forward, but we need to figure some stuff out. And I like it, and I think it'll function well for motor vehicles, 21 people. So if you can advance to the next one, Kyra. Similar set of questions here, most notable weaknesses that you're seeing. These, you could think about this as maybe challenges for the design team moving forward, coming out of this, if in fact we do explore this option further. And maybe as people are entering those ideas for the most notable weaknesses, Nancy, you could hit a few more questions from the chat.
Yeah, several of you. One thing that I wanted to mention that John just chatted to me, our traffic engineer, we could actually, with the geometry of this, better control speeds than say the signal option. We would be looking to do it more as a local street design. A lot of you have questions about bike and ped connections. I agree, we're gonna have to think through those more. With this option is definitely unusual, but I like to think that Golden loves unusual and will allow us some time to kind of work through some of these issues. Let's see. Okay, somebody says a bike through McCaslin, it's fine with the bike lanes. Moving trucks and or construction vehicles, once again, we would look to design, somebody mentioned school buses, moving trucks, those type of vehicles, but just not the big tractor trailers that you see on the interstates. And then for construction, we would be working with a contractor as they're doing it to make sure that not all of this would be built at once. Once it would be built in stages, so likely you would see some different configurations. And we would want to make sure that it was safe for construction vehicles to get through just during construction. Let's see.
Great. And maybe I'll jump in here, Nancy. So
yeah, go ahead, Jay.
Some of the notable weaknesses, people are saying confusing, unfamiliar. So that probably is the biggest hurdle, associated with a kind of a newer design like this. In the chat and in the word cloud, we're seeing bike safety, pedestrian safety. So again, a focus on the kind of the big high level concepts tonight, and we will be working on whichever ones kind of move forward, optimizing those for bikes and pedestrians, making sure that safety is paramount. As Ann had said earlier, thinking about wildlife and landscaping and all those different aspects too. What else do we have here? Complex, bike ped safety being an important piece. Crossings is a weakness that people identified, complicated. Great, so if you can advance to the next slide, Kyra. And Nancy, if you want to do a little more voiceover on the question and answer, that'd be great.
Once again, a lot of comments on bikes and peds, and I love that you are making those. These are great because we have several people on the design team on the call, and this is going to help us as we move forward. So once again, look for us to start, showing that information in a little bit more detail at the next one, at the next public meeting, and continue to look at guiding Golden. Snow came up. That's definitely something we're considering with this option that actually needs to be considered with all the options. But for something like this, how that works with trucks or snow plows and everything to that effect. And then I do want to reiterate with the bikes and peds, we would look to do what we can to separate those crossings and reduce the number of at grade. We just haven't got that far along. And surprisingly enough, will let everyone know at this location, it's actually from an engineering standpoint a little bit more complicated than 19th, and I never thought I would say that with the grades, but just some of the constraints we have, whether it's to the existing development, the Jefferson County complex and everything to that effect. It's once again a great challenge for us to see what we can make fit.
All right.
Michelle, good point. You're saying data-driven decisions. We are looking at the actual traffic numbers. We have pulled all the crash data, and we will be looking at making sure that we are mitigating those existing conditions, those existing issues based off the data that we are receiving.
Great. And Paul pointed out that all the PED crossings, while they are at grade in this initial kind of conceptualization, they're only single lane, which he considers a plus. People have mentioned other strengths being traffic flow, no traffic lights, no signals, efficient, better traffic flow. Again, I think we're hearing that then counterbalance with the weaknesses on the previous slide. Can we, make this safe enough, comfortable enough, legible enough for bikers, for pedestrians? People mentioned families and kids in the chat on bikes. Bike lanes might not be the best options for them, so there can be separated facilities. Those are all things we can investigate moving forward, and really appreciating the comments. Let's give it another maybe 20 seconds. I'm seeing this move around just a little bit, meaning that a few people are hitting submit still. Fun, someone said. That's a strength for this one. What else we got?
I'm going to agree with you on that one.
Streamline, innovative, reduce speed, better than existing, efficient. Great. All right, let's go on to our third alternative.
All right, Kyra, I'll let you get to that one. And this is not as traditional as, say, a signal, but it's the dual roundabout or the dog bone option that we have. So we all know that roundabouts at ramp intersections has become fairly standard in Colorado. So the familiarity aspect with this one, I think, is probably pretty close to the signal option. Vehicles do not have to wait at a signal or a stop sign. They can enter the interchange of movements as gaps occur. Let's go to the perspective, Kyra. So as you can see from this one, it has this option has a very similar footprint to the DDI, as I mentioned before, due to the kind of the balanced nature of the traffic. So the turning movements are fairly similar in all directions. It's actually a really good use of roundabouts. This option actually provides the best performance from that perspective for all the traffic. And it also lays on the land fairly well. So I'm going to go to the pros and cons, Kyra. So once again, least delay for vehicles, much like the DDI with the curvature and roundabouts, we can more effectively manage the speeds. This one gives us a little bit more flexibility with the ramp locations. And what I mean is based on the roundabouts, we can either squeeze them closer or we can move them farther apart depending on what we discover with what makes the most sense for both construction phasing and also like maybe the amount of walls, or other ways that we can reduce some costs. Roundabouts do reduce crash severity and frequency because you don't have cars broadsiding each other. We don't have any vehicle crossing conflicts. That doesn't mean there aren't any vehicle conflicts, just not the ones that are crossing. And then once again, if we do have any at-grade crossings, at this point with this type of option, we can do one-lane crossings for any potential trails. Cons, as most people know, you have to have a properly designed roundabout in order for it to work correctly. So that's at top of our list. And then this one is also a little bit more challenging to construct, as with the DDI, there are ways to easily kind of reconfigure those intersections during construction, or with the signal, that's really easy to do during construction. With this one, we'd have to have kind of various what I would call mini phases in order to get the ultimate intersection configuration. So, and then for those of you who like to do your on-street bikes, as you know, with roundabouts, we would either have the option of using a separate facility or remaining on the road. So with that, I'm going to go back to Jay with the questions, and let me look at what's in the chat. Okay, so a couple of things. Once again, sorry, as Jay, before you read this question, just for someone to say, once again, the regional trail's on the outside, and we would be doing that grade separation for the regional trail on all these options.
Great. And then Nancy, if you scroll up to timestamp 6:58, Richard was the first question on this alternative. And for everybody else on the Mentimeter, it looks like we're getting great response already. How do you feel alternative number 3, dual roundabouts, would work for motorized vehicles? It looks like the vast majority, 53 out of 65 so far, like it and think it'll function well for motorized vehicles. So people like it, but have 1 or 2 concerns, and just a handful of people, 3, aren't in one of those 2 I like it categories. So why don't we advance to the next one, asking about weaknesses, and Nancy, you can respond to some of those questions in the chat.
So a couple of things. A couple of you have mentioned light rail. We don't have any plans for that right now, but we do have, I'll talk with, we'll go back and talk about that internally, about any potential space for light rail. Right now, what we are designing is for the, as Dan said at the very beginning of the presentation, is the agreement that Golden and CDOT have for like future expansion if possible. But we'll note the light rail and ask that question. Do bikes enter the roundabout and go under the road? On the trail, on the regional trail, the main connection, we would look at a grade separation. And when I say that, right now we're showing it as under. It could potentially, depending on what we go through with design, be over. And then we're still determining what it would be on top of the bridge. Plowing with dual roundabouts actually works fairly well because the plows can just go around and then do a U-turn, which is how they generally operate. Worried about cars turning to merge with 6, we would definitely have to, we're taking that into consideration and making sure that those yield points are clearly defined, and we're doing geometry to make sure that they would be yielding to any bikes or peds. Once again, another light rail. Okay, somebody thinks it's efficient more than number 1 and more intuitive than number 2. Since for how much more costly this option is, my gut, and don't hold me to this, but my gut says it would be similar in cost to the DDI, but the signal would probably be slightly cheaper. How would a park space work with Dogbone or Diverging Diamond? We're still considering the park space. What does this look like? Some of that comes into the cost. Likely it won't be the exact same, amenity type as was done at 19th, but we're also looking what we could do in the corners and what that aspect would be. So we'll have a little bit of discussion of this at the end, but a lot of it is going to come up with that open house number 3. 2 lanes for the Dogbone. No, we do not. These would be single lane roundabouts with what we call these kind of partial bypass right turn lanes.
Nancy, maybe before you respond to Jen's question about the size and how it compares to Heritage, we can hit a couple of these highlighted responses in the next one. So the most people said none on weaknesses on this particular one, which kind of reflects what we're hearing in the chat, some support for this. I do think, and maybe I failed to mention that this was the weaknesses one. We'll go to positives next, or pros. So we did get some positive things, like it's great. People thought that it was intuitive. I think people highlighting some important considerations like ped safety, separating bikes and peds. Roundabout size was mentioned. I guess depending on that size, which we'll let Nancy speak to in a second, that could be viewed as a negative or a positive. Some people said that there's great public art opportunities. Someone said that it was weird. People said business deliveries might be difficult. Unfamiliar again, turning. So let's advance to the next one, which is notable strengths. And yeah, Nancy, if you want to start with Jen's question about the size of the roundabouts.
The size of the roundabouts here would be larger than the ones to the south on Heritage. So just for your information, that would be a little bit more designed to accommodate some of the slightly larger vehicles while still slowing speeds. I don't have an exact size for you yet. Sorry, I can't tell you it's like 160 feet. I'm going to go out on a limb and say that that's kind of close on the diameter, but don't quote me on that too much yet. We also just, FYI, I know there's been a lot of friction in Golden sometimes about roundabouts. And so we do have a couple of people on our team and also an outside expert that we're bringing in to make sure that if we go with a roundabout option and nothing has been decided, that we are providing you, the community, with the best project that we can. And once again, I'm seeing a little bit more with a lot about bike lanes and on street. We will be, like I said, we're still looking into this, and we'll be looking at providing options for both on street but off street for those who are not as comfortable going through a roundabout on a bike. Somebody had a question about signals more costly long term. Actually, signal maintenance does tend to be rather expensive in the long run when you consider having to replace the equipment and just how that operates. Let's see. Once again, a couple people are talking about pluses or minuses regarding cars. And I know we all want to talk about bikes and peds. We are going to get to that in the future, but this is also very car heavy thing. And so we want to make sure that we're addressing that and accounting for that also. Feel free, Joe or Dan, to pipe in with another question on that. Somebody else was asking about underpasses. We will be considering grade separations for those heavier movements. We will be looking at some landscaping amenity. And then another question that comes in will be a toll coming in the future for this stretch of highway. And this is one, I want to go ahead and answer it, but Dan or Ann, if you have an idea, or I think I saw Ben Davis on. Currently, I believe the agreement between Golden and CDOT is there is a written agreement with a trigger if the traffic gets to a certain number, where CDOT could come in and add a third lane. And that third lane could be what we call a managed or express lane. And so that lane could be added where you could potentially have tolling, but you would still have your other lanes or your general purpose lane. So hopefully that answered that question.
But let me be clear about that. Our agreement with CDOT, and in this case, traffic volumes have to hit 70,000 vehicles a day to trip we can add another lane. They have agreed that the current lanes are free, have to stay free. The new lanes could be a managed lane, but we would have 2 free lanes. And we did, when we were doing 19th, an extrapolation on how long it might take to get to 70,000 vehicles a day. And the answer was 69 years. That was like 4 years ago, so we still have 65 to go. So at this point, yes, we have to make accommodations, but all of the traffic work that has been done, including when we put together this plan and including when CDOT did the recent West Connect planning environmental study, we don't see those kind of traffic volumes here for a very, very long way out.
Great, and I will.
Yeah, and
go ahead, Nancy.
Well, go ahead, Jay. No, why don't you go ahead and then I can answer a few more questions before we move on to the last alternative.
Okay, that sounds great. Yeah, we do have one more alternative that we'll review, but before we do, a couple notable strengths mentioned for alternative 3, good flow. Flow mentioned a couple different ways, actually, traffic flow, good flow. Roundabouts are great. In the chat, it was interesting. I think we were seeing some pros and cons identified in the chat. Some people really liking the roundabouts, some saying that they're difficult to navigate, particularly on a bike. 1 lane exit, someone said, is a strength. Familiarity, no signals, slower traffic. As I think Nancy pointed out, as a lot of people probably know, the severity of accidents is less in a roundabout than a more typical intersection. Very Georgia O'Keeffe, someone said. I appreciate that one. Elegant, fewer lanes, fits in golden. Great. And then we're definitely hearing, and I'll let Nancy hit just a couple more of the questions and comments in the chat, but I think one or two people mentioned, just the importance of, before we lock into a preferred alternative, that we need to really understand those implications for ped and bikes. And that is our intent. We're not going to come out of this meeting and just go with one single alternative, but we need to try to narrow the field a bit while we're optimizing those and understand them better. So want to hit a couple more questions or comments, Nancy?
Well, first of all, like Richard's comment of making a tunnel all the way to Boulder, I don't think Dan would actually mind that. Couple of things. Handling speeds on US6, Hannah brought that up. That is a little bit more difficult. We would design this section for a lower speed, but that is something we will take into consideration. I agree with you. I've been out there and people have driven 70. I hope that they would not. That also, honestly, I hate to say this, is also a, sometimes it's just enforcement. Brian asked about crossing Heritage or Jefferson on the south side for this or the Diamond. We feel like it might end up being you would cross either down at Golden Ridge or up at Illinois, because there's not an immediate need on either side, but that is something that we are still considering. So thank you for that comment. Accidents in a roundabout, we would be looking at enough space in case vehicles did need to move over. That's another that's another comment. And then some more on bikes and peds. And then John Hausman, who is on and also a fabulous traffic engineer, gave me just a few traffic numbers for everyone for the reference. So currently you're talking about 42,000 cars per day on US6. And as Dan said, the trigger is 70,000. So it's quite a ways for us to get to add another lane. And then for reference, on 19th, we had about 12,000 vehicles per day. And so at this location, there's about 16,000 on the South Lake for Heritage, and then about 9,000 on Jefferson County Parkway. So that gives you a little bit of an indication of relative volumes.
Great.
All right.
Why don't we move on to our last alternative?
All right, so this one is a little different. It's another roundabout, but we're looking at a single roundabout option. Please, I know some of you are going to look at this and give us comments about geometry. We are still really working through this one. It would be the ramps coming into a single roundabout. One advantage of this is it pulls the ramps in, giving you a little bit more room on the outsides of the interchanges and for the regional trail. But like I said, we're still working on the geometry of this. It's a slightly different configuration, which, like I said, is why we are bringing in experts to help us with this. Maybe go to the bird's eye perspective, Kyra. So as you can see here, it's a different sort of roundabout configuration, so it would be slightly unfamiliar. It does essentially operate kind of as like the other roundabout option. It's just with one rather than two. However, it does require a larger bridge, as you can see here, to make this work. So maybe go to the pros and cons, Kyra. So once again, we've got less vehicle delay. The most compact footprint for the entirety of the interchange, even though if you see on the right, it's a larger bridge. So please keep that in mind, that when I say most compact footprint, I'm talking about the entirety of the interchange. A little bit more potential for amenity zones outside the interchange. So I mean like on the outer edges of the ramps. It's also the most separation from the regional trail. And then once again, these cases, you'd have one lane crossings for any potential trail connections. The cons, it definitely is an unusual configuration to design, something we need to consider during our evaluation. There's no way to get away from it. This would be a larger bridge, which would be more cost, which is something for those of you who've been thinking about like, how do we do grade separations through this? when we go through our evaluation process, cost is one of the criteria we look at. This is not as familiar to drivers. And then there would be more what we call throwaway pavement or detours during construction. The constructability of this one is probably the most difficult. So maybe we want to go to load up the questions.
Sounds great. Yeah, so this first one again, how would this work for motorized vehicles? Again, we're focusing on kind of the overall flow for vehicles to start out, because it has not been optimized for bikes and peds yet, any of these options, but we intend to do so. So just in response to a couple additional comments there, and keep them coming. We invite the feedback, but just wanted to say that once more. Maybe we'll give this one a couple of seconds here, and we are beginning to get some questions. But maybe we'll respond to this one, and then we can have Nancy speak to some of those questions and comments in the chat once we go to the next question. So on this one, I like it. I think it'll function well. As 15 folks so far, 21 like it, but 1 or 2 concerns. So if you do have the concern, whether it's 1 or 2 or several significant questions or concerns, please do include those in the chat. Not sure or neutral, 7. I don't like this option, 9. So not as strong of support so far, from what I'm seeing as alternative 3, but we'll have a chance to compare across all four alternatives once we get through this section. So if you want to advance, Kyra, to the next slide. Again, I failed to mention it before, asking for notable weaknesses on this one first. And then Nancy, if you want to respond to a few of the questions and comments, go ahead.
I like the one from Jason that says maybe an ellipse about. We did look at that. We tried to make it work. It's been very frustrating. Let me just put it that way. David brings up another thing about danger at the ramps. We definitely, safety is kind of like the top thing that we're looking at with this project. So let's see, sounds expensive. There is more of a bridge, but we might have some more cost savings by pulling the ramps in with lack of wall, with fewer walls on the outside. So that's a really good comment. We will be providing some of that information or looking at that during the evaluation process. Okay, a couple of you mentioned if there was an accident and stopping traffic, obviously a big concern that we would design for. Peds and bike crossing, yeah, you have a lot of people more concerned about it clogging, the potential for it to clog up, for the lack of a better term. And then too small for the traffic amount. A couple of comments. We are, like I said, we are looking at this option, the traffic. But once again, when we're talking about the traffic, remember that we're taking the majority of the US6 through traffic away. So that does give us a little bit more flexibility. 1-lane roundabout or Champs-Élysées? No, it would be more of a 1-lane roundabout. Okay, Eric, you just made me laugh. Big Ben, European Vacation, for those of you who have not seen that. I love, by the way, guys, keep the comments coming. I mean, these are great. I love the community in Golden. It's just,
Absolutely.
Yes, it is. It is a little bit car focused on the overpass. Once again, when we're looking at this for the peds and bikes, we will be looking at the opportunities we have to provide separate facilities and grade separations. But unfortunately, traffic, and I know you all hate to hear this, but traffic is a little bit of a higher priority than it was at 19th, just because of the nature of what we're dealing with. Let's see. North-south traffic counts through the intersections. Once again, we had 16,000 vehicles on Heritage. There is a little bit of a drop-off once you get south of Golden Ridge. We also have 9,000 on Jeffco, but the counts are also, it's more about, okay, I'm gonna start drawing with my hands in the air, so forgive me, everyone. And then Jay, feel free, let me explain this real quick, and then feel free to jump in. So when we were on 19th, if you were coming out of Golden, making the left before and going towards Jefferson County, that was the big movement in the PM, and in the morning it was the same, coming north and going into Golden. those were the two that we were trying to account for. What we're dealing with here is like all the right and left turns are pretty similar in size, and so we have to accommodate them in a separate manner. So that's just kind of a big picture. But Jay, why don't you go ahead and go over the question?
Yeah, that's great. So notable weaknesses. My favorite maybe might be nah, bro, which apparently was said by several people. But we're seeing cost. Several people said waste, separate bikes and peds, pedestrian ramp danger, expensive, fear of congestion. We heard in the chat, and it shows up here in the word cloud as well. The fear of if there's a crash that they could actually create congestion or slowdown. Too busy, perhaps. So again, we would definitely have to be testing that with the work that we do. In the chat and in the word cloud, we're seeing art being an opportunity. Why don't we advance to the next one where we highlight those strengths? And Nancy, I did see a question about, or a couple questions about how you navigate, taking a right-hand turn. If you wouldn't mind explaining that, and then maybe hitting a couple more questions in the chat.
So with these, the right-hand turn, like I said, we're still working on this, but the right-hand turns, if you're just making an immediate right, you would kind of come to a yield condition, a stop, making sure that you're not doing a conflict with another car or a ped and a bike, and then you would just turn right. So it's a little bit it's not totally free flow, but it would be more of a yield condition, at least as you're coming up to the roundabout. Hopefully that answered your question.
Yeah, and Brian pointed out the large area in the middle being a no man's zone. So we can look at opportunities for that space. Claire mentioned art in response to that. Brian suggests maybe a Big Ben statue in the middle. And then some of our notable strengths, we're seeing familiar, simple, the flow, compact. Yeah, I mean, this is the largest bridge, but it is one of the simpler approaches. Extra green space was highlighted as a strength. We're round, decent flow, simplicity, simple to design. We'll let Nancy deal with that one. Art opportunity, safety, decent flow, speed. Great. Handle big vehicles was mentioned as a strength. And then Nancy, do you want to hit one or two more questions? If there are any.
Let's see. Christopher says giant skylight in the middle. Well, if Dan gets his way, that's like what he would like to do. We've already had multiple discussions about that. So, and I'm just seeing, usable space that is, like Jay said, a large no man's zone. We would have to look at options as, the best way to use that space, whether it's art or something else. But I mean, we wouldn't look to encourage people to go to the center of the roundabout because of the safety aspects. So.
Great. So why don't we give it another maybe 10 seconds or so. If anyone wants to enter strength on this option 4. Jacob said the dog bone has some bridge greenery advantage to him over the single roundabout, since you focus the green space around the paths. Brian said he fears the final design could have right turn lanes smoothed out, eating into that corner green space. So something we would definitely have to consider, and we'd encourage you all to keep us accountable on. Claire said green streams, and David loves the art opportunities. All right. So Kyra, if you wouldn't mind advancing to the next one here. So what we're asking next is a comparison across all of these alternatives. And Nancy, I know we've been asking you to talk a lot, but if you wouldn't mind just in 5 to 10 seconds, just a quick review of each of the 4 alternatives.
Okay, so number 1 is basic signals. Number 2 is a diverging diamond interchange, but with stop signs instead of signals. Number 3 and number 2, the key is the traffic crosses over. It's all free flowing. Number 3 is the dual roundabouts or the dog bone option, once again, pretty similar to what you've experienced elsewhere. And then number 4 is taking the roundabout option and compressing it into one single option.
Yeah, and then just to respond to something in the chat, in all options that we're showing, the flow along Highway 6 goes under. So what we're asking you to do.
Thank you, Jay.
Yep, go ahead.
No, I was just saying thank you for making that clarification.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
That 6 is going. So once again, on all the options, the 6 through traffic is going underneath, so it wouldn't be on top. And then also we have that grade separation for the regional trail.
Perfect. So our first question, we are going to ask you to rank, but we want to kind of get a sense, because sometimes you're forced to rank and you're not quite sure, you know, what all the details are, or if you have all the information. So we are going to ask you to rank the 4 alternatives in the next question, but wanted to get a sense of, you know, how people were feeling about the information provided this evening. So about 23 folks said that they have enough information. 22 said that they could rank. They'll be interested in getting more information about the alternatives. 14, I can rank the alternatives, but we'll be interested in getting more information about the alternatives that you rank the highest. And then one person said they don't have enough information this evening. So if you don't want to vote on the ranking for that one individual, that is definitely okay. And you can look at the detail on Guiding Golden. That'll be up by Friday. We'll have more information, obviously, in the next meetings. But with that,
So Jay, can I step in real quick?
yeah.
Had a really good question from Robin. She asked, does option 2 have the ability to turn left north when coming from Heritage? I know there's kind of a weird thing that was done at 19th, where to go north, say to Boulder, you go down to the roundabout and turn around. I just wanted to clarify for everyone, all of these options, you would be allowed to make any movement that you want to within the immediate interchange vicinity. So Robin, did that answer your question? You can type in the chat if you want, but just wanted to make sure that everyone understood that.
That covers.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Robin.
You're welcome.
And then a couple people were, I think they may have joined late, asking about the voting. We are polling at this point. I know it's semantics, but just want to clarify, we're not voting on, you know, the winning alternative this evening. We're trying to get a sense on what's worth exploring further, what's not. But as Tina pointed out, it's menti.com. It's up on the top of the screen as well as in the chat. menti.com, and then 3628328 if you want to jump in on the polling. And then Kyra, if you wouldn't mind advancing to the next slide. So we're asking, and a few people already got in there before we jumped backwards, but please rank the alternatives. It's a little different interface on your polling device. So you got to go down the list. If you don't like any of the options, or maybe, you know, one is decidedly like, I don't want it at all, you could actually put none above it if you wanted to. So you can rank 1 to 5 actually on this one, using none of these options if you want us to really scratch our heads and go back to the drawing board on this. Let's see. Okay, so far we are seeing, and this is about close to 2/3 of people responding so far, that alternative 3 is ranking the highest. That's that dual roundabout or dog bone. Second being the single roundabout, which is the last one we looked at, alternative 4. The stop control diverging diamond is 3rd right now. 4th is the signalized diamond interchange. And then I think people are acknowledging the hard work that we did in coming up with some alternatives, so appreciate that. None of these is 5th. It looks like we're getting a few more responses, but it's not really changing the results significantly. So we'll give this another few seconds. And Michelle clarified we are voting on options for cars, since that's what the questions were. Absolutely, thank you for that clarification. And we're excited to see what happens for the bikes and peds as well. I'm looking forward to optimizing those, making those as safe as possible. So to that end, as the alternatives are refined in the next phase, how important will it be to minimize conflicts between motorized vehicles and non-motorized uses in the interchange? This will influence some of the design decisions, some of those criteria for evaluation that Nancy was talking about. Cost being one, but if you all tell us that minimizing those conflicts between motorized and non-motorized uses, meaning ped, bike, joggers, maybe scooters, wheelchairs, minimizing those conflicts is a high priority. We will definitely emphasize that more in the design as well. So we're hearing so far that's very high. And again, a conflict doesn't necessarily have to just be a collision. It can be a sense of discomfort. It can be near collisions and that sort of thing. So how comfortable, how safe are you feeling? And then obviously want to avoid any sorts of collisions or accidents as well. So very high importance, 4.5% or 4.5 points on the scale to 5 for minimizing those conflicts as we move forward in refining the designs. 4.6 actually just went up. All right. And then if we could go to the next one. So in this next section, we're going to invite Paul, who's our lead landscape designer on the team, to talk a little bit about some of the guidance that will be helpful for us as we refine the design further when it comes to landscape and urban design and placemaking.
Thanks, Jay. So this really is an acknowledgement that we're going to look at more than just traffic flow and cars. And as part of this, we're interested in getting a preview or kind of a running start on how you feel about the landscape themes. And really the themes are the overall character, the use of the plant material, really taken as a whole. And so we're taking a little different approach on these questions. There'll just be a few slides on this, so it'll go pretty quick. And you'll be giving what we call a visual preference opportunity, where we'll show you two images. And we try and make them fairly high contrast, so you can let us know which of the images is really the one that would be best applied to the Heritage Road interchange. And so we have two options, and you're going to select the landscape theme that you think is the most appropriate for the project. And you may have concerns or thoughts about that, but which one do you think is the best that we should be looking at as we start getting into the actual aesthetic designs for the project, strictly focusing on landscape character, planting, and that sort of thing? So we basically, what we're talking about here is what type of landscape would you see the trails be set in? Are we going to go with a naturalized landscape with some maintained edges? I think this is from one of your paths in the Golden area. Whereas we have a contrast with the image on the left, just as beautiful, but more of a standard irrigated landscape and more maintained. And so if you could let us know which one of those do you think is most appropriate for our project, that'd be great.
And we know that these, in many of these cases, the photos aren't perfect. This isn't the exact right setting, so we're not asking you to vote on necessarily the species of plant or tree or that sort of thing, but the kind of pitting these two concepts against each other. The naturalized landscape / maintained edges versus the standard irrigated maintained landscape. So the vast majority of folks, 57 out of 63 so far, have said more of a naturalized landscape with maintained edges. Great. Kyra, if you wouldn't mind going to the next slide. Paul?
Once again, the two different landscapes. We have kind of more of your standard bluegrass, but this with accented more like with shrub beds, with shrubs and perennials. And the important thing about this is that this is actually lower initial cost, but it's higher for long-term maintenance. In reality, irrigated bluegrass is a relatively inexpensive landscape treatment to install. Whereas on the right-hand side, you have kind of more of a, and this is about, this is sort of at the top end of what you're going to see on a naturalized landscape. I think this is Kendrick Park down in Lakewood. Native low water use plants and shrubs within native grasses, and really this is kind of the high impact areas. A lot of the landscape in this project would probably be areas of native grasses with these accent beds that you're seeing in this image. Once again, this is a higher initial cost, but once it's established, after about 2 or 3 years, you have lower long-term maintenance.
All right. So again, lower initial cost, higher maintenance landscape versus a higher initial cost and lower maintenance landscape tends to be more, as Paul said, the bluegrass on the left, and then the perennials, native grasses and whatnot, shrubs on the right. So even more distinct preference on the second question, 62 out of 64 for looking at the higher initial cost, lower maintenance landscape with the shrubs, perennials, and native grasses. Next slide, Kara.
So obviously there's a lot of different ways you can go when we're starting to design the placement of the plant material. In a lot of urban landscapes, you'll see a more formal approach where you have lines of plant material, and this is showing all ornamental grasses, but in reality, it would probably be a mix of ornamental grasses and shrubs, but in a formal placement. Rows, regular patterns that are repeated throughout the landscape, and once again, these could be in beds that are surrounded by native grasses based on the feedback we've heard before. Or do we go with more informal groupings like you see on the right, more naturalized? Very simple choice on this one.
Great. So we're seeing almost all the responses in already, I think, of our participants still using Mentimeter. Again, vast majority, not quite as distinct difference as that last question, but 60 out of 64 for the informal groupings versus that more formal grouping or shapes, patterns. Great. All right, that is the end of our survey.
And some of the comments we heard were, love the native vegetation, hard to keep alive, look at Heritage Road, bluegrass belongs in Kentucky, not in Colorado. And we had a ditto on that one, on the Heritage Road landscape. Maybe some of the plant material is not surviving as well.
Great.
Native flower and chaos, please.
And I'll just add one more thing about the survey. We're leaving it open for 2 weeks from today. I think that's March 10th. So if you know anyone who wasn't able to attend tonight, they're able to go on Guiding Golden and access the survey and provide their input for 2 weeks after today.
And then before we turn over to Dan for some additional comments and next steps, we had a couple of additional questions for Paul, I believe. So James was asking about drought conditions, and Tina, maybe in jest, is saying who will weed the flowers?
That is the one advantage of the native landscape, is that once it's established, it can generally survive better in a drought condition. Now, I will say that even on, other than the bluegrass, within the shrub beds that you saw on the more standard landscapes, we would be going with naturalized native plant material that would be low water use or drought tolerant. So the main difference would be the bluegrass on those. CDOT's landscape requirements within their right of way are for native plant selection. So we would be focusing on that.
Great, thanks, Paul.
Jay, this is Nancy. Sorry to interrupt. I just wanted to add something. Well, first of all, everyone be very thankful that we have Paul and his crew on board to pick these things, and we're not depending on the engineers. And then before we go to Dan, I just wanted to mention, because I forgot it in presenting the alternatives, just as we're doing the evaluation, we do have, Golden has already hired a contractor similar to what they did with 19th, and it's once again Kramer, and they are also going to be helping us when we're doing cost and the evaluation, and just once again having another round of experts to help us come up with the best project for the community. So I just wanted to insert that because I forgot to mention it earlier, Jay.
Yeah, great, thank you, Nancy. Michelle mentioned the native plants means more forage for pollinators. Lon was mentioning that the 1906 landscaping will hopefully look better in the future as it gets more established. And then Hannah was pointing out an example that they like. So I think with that, Paul, any last comments before we
Yeah,
turn?
Jay, I didn't address the maintenance question. And Dan, you can jump in on this. I don't know if the maintenance has been officially been defined, but certainly at Heritage Road, I believe it's all, at least the deck area was by City of Golden maintenance crews. And Dan, you might want to just clarify that question a little bit better.
The trails, however we work them over, plus the regional trail, all of those are maintained by the city. They get plowed for snow. And the landscaping that we have at 6 and 19 is all maintained by the city. Our agreement with CDOT is everything on the top is Golden's and the structure underneath is CDOT's. So all of the, I guess, niceties we would maintain.
Great. Thanks, Dan. And then I think we're ready to turn it over to Dan for some closing remarks. Again, keep the comments and questions coming in the chat. We are exporting those and have been sort of keeping notes throughout both of the questions and comments in the chat. We'll be exporting from the Mentimeter polling and then also documenting the responses that have been given in the meeting. But with that, Dan, if you'd like to provide some closing remarks and discuss the next steps.
Okay. First of all, I want to really stress that Guiding Golden is open and available for further comments. And we would be happy to get more comments. I know this is one of those things that you'll wake up in the middle of the night and go, why didn't I say something about that? So you will have time to do that at guidinggolden.com. Next, we will take all of the input tonight, and I know there's been lots of talk about PEDs, bicycles, and we're not there yet. We're going to take the I guess, top probably two alternatives, and we will start working on PEDs, bikes, trying to optimize those things, optimize visual, optimize landscaping, and we will be digging in much deeper to cost, and we'll be doing that probably over the next, I don't know, Nancy, 3 days, you'll have all that done.
By tomorrow morning, of course.
No, it will probably spend 2 or 3 months before we ask you all to weigh in again. And at that point in time, we expect to have a couple of alternatives, but we will have all of the bike, pedestrian, landscape questions worked out as best as we can for that alternative. So that would give us an opportunity for you to take a look at what we've done with the current concerns you've voiced, and let us know what you think before we have a final alternative. And then at that point, after we get that input from you, we will go to work on the hard stuff of turning this into a real set of plans that CDOT will approve, that meets all the environmental regulations, and we will then go forward with that to hopefully have a final set of plans that we've gotten funded for construction and we can move forward. And I can't thank you all enough for the thoughtful input you're giving us, besides which traffic option we might be moving ahead with. You have certainly given us lots of feedback about how we have to optimize that, and that is very important to us. So with that, you can keep commenting, Guiding Golden. You have neighbors that wish they could have been here, Guiding Golden. And we'll have the polling questions up for 2 more weeks. So please encourage people to go there. And with that, I guess I will say I can't thank you all enough for taking the time to sit in and help us optimize this for something that you will love. I have a statement that people around here are sick of hearing, but I refer to these types of projects as designable moments, and that you have one moment right now where we're designing this to do it really, really well, because once we start building something, it's going to be out there 50, 70, who knows, a really long time. And we really want to do it right, and your input really helps us. So thank you very much. Jay, I'm turning it back to you.
Sorry, I was just unmuting. Yeah, I just repeated in the chat something that Nancy had said. Again, we're hearing loud and clear the concern about pet and bike safety, and rest assured we are not, although the sequence of this evening was suggestive that we're thinking of vehicles first. We just want to narrow the number of options that we're really trying to kind of think through these critical issues in terms of potential grade separation, the width of paths, where we want to be on street, off street, that sort of thing. So Nancy pointed out that getting feedback tonight on the traffic is going to help us look at those connections in more detail. So we will not be focusing on just a single alternative coming out of this evening. We're going to take all the input, especially I think that highlighting of the need for pedestrian bike safety in refining those that are kind of beginning to elevate to the top. Maybe we can, scrap 1 or 2 of these alternatives as we optimize. I think with that, we can stay on, or at least I can stay on. I think I'm one of the hosts and recording. Stay on for a couple of minutes if people still want to enter some ideas in the chat. But again, we want to thank you for your participation this evening. I'll just check with our team. Any last comments, Paul, Nancy, Dan, Ann?
Jay, I would just say thank you everyone for taking time out of your meeting to come and join us today. I'm very glad that you liked the presentation and the polling. Thank you, Paul, Kyra, and Jay for putting together the presentation. But your input, we take this and we take it to our design team, and it really does help us guide us through the whole process. And so once again, I just really appreciate all the thoughtful input and the comments. And please tell all your friends to go to Guiding Golden, take the survey, and just give us more thoughts and ideas, because you are the people who use this intersection every day.
Awesome. And Ann, were you gonna add something?
I just want to let everyone know that if you registered for this meeting, you will start getting emails from me reminding you of next meetings and opportunities to comment. So thank you for that extra step of registering for this meeting.
Awesome. So with that, I think that's concluded the formal part of this evening. Again, we'll stay on for a few minutes. I'm seeing a few more chats and questions come in. I want to make sure we have an opportunity for you to enter those. But thanks so much. We're really excited for your participation and look forward to seeing you next time.